So here we are, diving straight into the mess that started it all. That jolt in Omaha that nobody saw coming, but changed everything. It's November 4th, 1988, a Friday like any other in North Omaha. The kind where folks are wrapping up the week, thinking about dinner, maybe a beer after work. But inside the Franklin Community Federal Credit Union, things are about to unravel fast. This place, tucked into the heart of the community, has been a lifeline for years. Loans for homes, cars, you name it, helping folks who the big banks wouldn't touch. That morning, federal agents show up, not with coffee and donuts, but with badges and paperwork. They're from the NCUA, the National Credit Union Administration. And they've got bad news. Audits have turned up something rotten, extensive financial irregularities, holes in the books that you could drive a truck through. Missing funds, big time. We're talking millions evaporated into thin air. The agents move, quick. They lock the doors, tell the staff to step aside. By midday, it's official. The Franklin Community Federal Credit Union is closed. NCUA places Franklin in receivership, which is basically the Fed saying, we're taking over because this ship's sinking, and we need to salvage what we can. Word spreads like wildfire through the neighborhood. People start showing up at the doors, banging on the glass, demanding to know what's happening to their savings. You can feel the panic in the air, thick as fog. This wasn't just a bank. It was a community anchor. Churches, local businesses, everyday folks, they'd all trusted Franklin with their hard-earned cash. And now, it's gone. Later tallies put the missing money at roughly $38 to $40 million. That's not pocket change. That's a fortune vanished, leaving a crater in Omaha's economy. The shock hits the institution's heart too. Schools, charities that bank there, suddenly scrambling. Reporters swarm the scene, cameras flashing, questions flying. How did this happen? Who's responsible? You know how these things go. Shiny facade, but dig a little, and the rot pours out. Federal intervention means investigations are just ramping up, agents poring over ledgers in dimly lit rooms, piecing together the fraud. The community reels, anger, disbelief, that quiet fear of what's next. Omaha wakes up to a scandal that's not just financial, it's personal, ripping at the trust that held things together. And as the sun sets on that November day, the questions linger, heavy in the cold air. But to understand how it all crumbles so spectacularly, we need to step back and look at the world that built Franklin up in the first place. We've seen the wreckage of that collapse, the trust shattered, and the money vanished into thin air. But to get why it hit so hard, we have to rewind the tape back to the beginning, when everything looked golden. Let's step into Omaha, Nebraska, in the 1970s, a city humming with that Midwestern grit, factories churning, folks scraping by in tight-knit neighborhoods. It's the kind of place where community means something, where credit unions popped up to give the little guy a fighting chance against the big banks. Enter the Franklin Community Federal Credit Union, founded to serve the underserved, black communities, low-income families, anyone shut out of the mainstream financial world. It started small, but by the early 70s, It was building a reputation as a beacon of hope, a place where loans weren't just numbers, but lifelines. And at the center of it all, Lawrence E. King Jr. King didn't come out of nowhere. He started climbing the ladder around 1970, fresh-faced and ambitious, rising through the ranks at Franklin. He had that charisma, you know, the kind that draws people in, makes them believe in the vision. Under his watch, Franklin grew, expanding services, pulling in members, becoming a fixture in Omaha's north side. But it wasn't just banking. King was weaving himself into the fabric of local politics. He rubbed shoulders with city council members, threw fundraisers, even got involved in Republican circles. By the mid-70s, he was a rising star, the go-to guy for community outreach, flashing that wide smile at every event. Omaha back then? It was a mix of old money and new dreams, with racial tensions simmering under the surface, economic divides splitting the city. Franklin thrived in that gap, positioning itself as the equalizer, lending to folks the big institutions ignored. King played it smart, hosting community events, sponsoring youth programs, building alliances that kept the credit union's profile high. You could feel the buzz around it. People trusted Franklin because it felt like one of their own. And King, he was the face of success, a black man breaking barriers in a white-dominated world, turning heads and opening doors. The institutional setup helped. Lax oversight in those days, credit unions seen as safe, community-driven entities with lighter regulations. It was an era when ambition could run unchecked as long as the books looked balanced and the public image shone. You know how these things go, shiny on the surface, shadows lurking when no one bothers to look. Franklin's stature grew through the decade, King at the helm, steering it toward what seemed like unstoppable prominence. The social scene in Omaha buzzed with his name, from boardrooms to barbecues, everyone wanting a piece of the action. It was the perfect setup, a credit union rising on waves of goodwill and political savvy. But as we'll see next, that rise came with whispers, hints of trouble brewing just beneath it all. All right, we've covered the climb, how Franklin Credit Union shot up under Larry King's flashy leadership, riding that wave of social change through the 70s and 80s. But by 1988, things were starting to crack. Small fissures at first, the kind that make you wonder if the foundation's as solid as it looks. It was June of that year when the first real whisper of trouble hit the air. A social worker, doing her job like any other day, filed a report on possible child abuse allegations tied to folks connected with the credit union. Nothing explosive yet, just a note in the system, but it was the sort of thing that could linger, waiting to be picked up by bigger hands. And sure enough, that report would find its way into the sights of the Legislative Franklin Committee down the line. You have to picture it. Omaha in the summer heat, the credit union still humming along, Larry King throwing his parties, charming the room. But underneath, these allegations were like smoke signals, faint but persistent. No one was screaming fire yet, but if you paid attention, you could feel the temperature rising. Then came September, and things got a little more personal. There was this woman named Owen. Arrested for writing bad checks. Nothing earth-shattering, but it stuck.
Her name popped into the Franklin investigative records, documented in those appellate summaries later on.
It was a minor blip at the time, but it planted seeds, hints of financial slip-ups that might connect to bigger rot inside the credit union. You know how these things go. Clean on paper, messy in the dark. These weren't front-page scandals yet. They were quiet precursors, the kind that build slow and steady. The social workers' report in June opened a door, just a crack, to questions about what was really going on behind the credit union's polished facade. Allegations of possible child abuse, vague, unproven at that point, but enough to make authorities take a second look. And Owen's arrest in September? It added a layer, tying personal missteps to the growing file on Franklin. Bad checks might seem small, but in a place built on trust and money, it's like finding a loose thread on a suit that's supposed to be bespoke. Pull it, and who knows what unravels. All through 1988, these pieces were falling into place, setting the stage for what was coming. The credit union was still operating, still part of the community fabric, but the whispers were getting louder. Early allegations, minor arrests, they were the build-up, the tension before the snap. And as the year wound down, it was clear something had to give. Following this build-up, the next segment will focus intimately on the collapse day events and the financial unraveling in slow motion. We've been piecing together those early warnings, the whispers from social workers, and the shadows creeping in before everything hit the fan. But let's zero in on the day it all cracked open, November 4, 1988. Picture a crisp fall morning in Omaha, the kind where the air bites just a little and the streets are buzzing with the usual routine. Franklin Community Federal Credit Union sat there on North 24th Street, looking every bit the pillar of the community it claimed to be. Employees shuffling in, coffee in hand, ready for another day of deposits and loans. Then, without much fanfare, federal agents roll up, suits from the FBI, backed by officials from the National Credit Union Administration, or NCUA as they're known. These weren't the dramatic SWAT teams you see in movies. No, this was more like accountants with badges, moving in methodically. They flashed their credentials at the front desk, and just like that, the place is locked down. Doors get sealed, tellers are told to step away from their stations, and the hum of daily operations grinds to a halt. The agents start with the basics, securing the premises to prevent any tampering. They cordon off the vaults, the file rooms, the computer terminals, anything that could hold a scrap of evidence. NCUA reps are right there in the mix, their role clear from the get-go. They're the regulatory muscle, the ones who oversee credit unions nationwide, and they've been digging into Franklin's books for weeks, maybe months. What they found? Extensive financial irregularities, ledges that didn't add up, transactions that smelled off. And the big one, missing funds, deposits that had vanished into thin air. By the time the dust settled, NCUA would peg it at roughly $38 to $40 million gone, poof, like it never existed. You know how these things go. Trust on the surface, but someone's always dipping into the till when the lights are low. Official statements came quick that day. NCUA issued a press release, dry as bone, announcing the closure due to unsafe and unsound practices and those missing deposits. Federal agents echoed it, emphasizing the need to protect depositors and preserve whatever assets were left. No arrests right then, just a shutdown to stop the bleeding. Next came the seizure procedures, methodical by the book. Agents inventoried everything: cash on hand, account records, loan files. They boxed up ledgers, floppy disks, remember those, and hauled them out under guard. The NCUA took the reins officially, placing Franklin into receivership that same afternoon. Receivership? It's basically the financial equivalent of putting a business on life support, with the NCUA as the doctor deciding what gets saved and what gets cut. They appointed a liquidator to oversee the mess, tasked with tracking down those missing millions and figuring out remedies, like insurance payouts or asset sales. Depositors were assured their money was insured up to the federal limits, but for many, that was cold comfort when the doors stayed shut. By evening, the building was a ghost town, signs posted on the doors. Closed by order of the NCUA. That was the mechanics of it. The raid, the statements, the handover to receivership, all unfolding in one long, tense day. Next, we'll dissect the critical first 48 hours after Franklin's closure, unpacking the immediate reactions and institutional shockwaves. So, we just seen the feds swoop in and shut down Franklin, uncovering those vanishing millions. But what happened next? In those raw first 48 hours, that's where the real storm started brewing. Picture Omaha in early November 1988, right after the collapse, on the 4th. The air's crisp, but the mood in the city is anything but. People wake up to headlines screaming about the credit union's downfall. Local papers detail the seizure, the federal agents locking doors, and whispers of massive financial holes. Depositors line up outside, faces pale, demanding answers about their life savings. It's chaos. Phone lines jammed, reporters scrambling for quotes from anyone who'll talk. And then, almost immediately, the stories start trickling out. Not just about the money, but darker stuff. Allegations of abuse tied to the credit union's bigwigs. These claims surface in murmurs at first, from a few brave souls stepping forward. The public gets wind through radio bulletins and evening news spots, framing it as potential scandals bubbling under the financial mess. By the second day, it's everywhere. Neighbors talking over fences, folks in diners piecing together rumors. The outcry builds fast, a mix of outrage over lost funds and horror at these emerging abuse stories. You know how these things go. The bigger the fall, the quicker the skeletons tumble out. That pressure hits the Nebraska legislature hard. By December 1988, they convened the Franklin Committee to dig into the credit union's collapse and these budding abuse allegations. It's their way of saying, okay, we'll look into this mess. They even hire private investigators, folks like Gary Caradori, to chase down leads. But the public's not waiting around. The outcry swells, turning into calls for accountability, protests outside state buildings. Media picks it up nationally, too. Fast forward to April 1st, 1990, and there's this long Washington Post profile that nails it. They call the local atmosphere a hurricane of scandal, laying out the financial misdeeds alongside these contested abuse claims. It's contemporaneous reporting that captures how the story exploded, framing the abuse allegations as part of this bigger, swirling controversy. People read that and think, what the hell is going on in Nebraska? That piece becomes a launchpad, fueling more questions, more demands for truth. Those first shocks ripple out, setting the stage for what comes next. Up next, we'll follow the official investigatory responses launching from these initial shocks, including legislative actions and investigative hires. So, the committee's up and running, and those abuse claims are starting to bubble up from the shadows. People are talking, but talk's cheap without proof. That's when the Franklin Committee decides they need someone on the ground, someone who knows how to chase leads without tipping off the wrong folks. Enter Gary Caradori, a private investigator with a reputation for getting to the bottom of things. They hire him late in 1988, task him with piecing together whatever fragments of truth he can find. Caradori's no stranger to gritty work. He's got that quiet determination, the kind that wears you down if you're hiding something. By 1989, he's knee-deep in it, tracking down alleged victims, listening to their stories in dingy motel rooms or wherever they feel safe enough to talk. But he doesn't just take notes, he rolls tape. Videotaped interviews, that's his method, capturing every hesitation, every tear-stained detail on camera. From October through December of 1989, he sits down with these folks, alleged victims, spilling accounts that twist your gut. One of them stands out, Alicia Owen. She's young, sharp-eyed, and her story cuts deep. Accusations that name names, point fingers at the powerful. Caradori handles her gently but firmly, asking the tough questions without pushing too hard, letting the narrative unfold, layer by layer. These tapes aren't just recordings, they're raw, unfiltered glimpses into lives turned upside down. He builds trust slowly, cross-checking details where he can, piecing together timelines that overlap in eerie ways. Owen's interview in particular spins out a multi-layered tale: parties, abuse, cover-ups that snake through Omaha's underbelly. Other victims echo bits of it, adding their own shadows to the picture. Once he's got them, Caradori doesn't keep these tapes locked away. He circulates them to the committee staff, lets the weight of those voices sink in. Pretty soon, they're evidentiary cornerstones, the kind of stuff that could make or break a case. But here's the rub. Owen ends up indicted, convicted on 8 counts of perjury. Her story, once a bombshell, gets labeled a lie. You know how these things go. Truth gets buried under doubt, and the tapes that seem so solid start to crack. Caradori's methods were straightforward. Build rapport, document everything, let the witnesses speak for themselves.
Yet those narratives kept evolving, layering on complexities that no one saw coming. It was the groundwork that set the stage for everything that followed. And as these tapes made their rounds, the real fight was just beginning. The push and pull between institutions grappling with a scandal that's exploding right in their faces. So, we dug into those initial probes, with Caradori chasing leads, and those tapes starting to surface from the accusers. But now, the machine kicked in, the official gears grinding to life. It was time for the big institutions to weigh in, and let me tell you, it got messy fast. First off, on March 19th, 1990, Douglas County decided to impanel a grand jury. This wasn't just some routine step. They were tasked with sifting through the allegations, pulling in all the related materials. What started as whispers of financial sleight of hand was shifting, pivoting hard toward these claims of hidden sexual abuse networks. The grand jury was the legal hammer, meant to crack it all open, or maybe just contain the blast. You could feel the posture changing, officials circling the wagons, projecting calm authority while the storm built. And then the media piled on. By April 1st, 1990, the Washington Post dropped a long profile that captured it all. They called the local atmosphere a hurricane of scandal, winds whipping up stories of financial misdeeds right alongside those contested abuse claims. National eyes were on it now, turning the whole thing into a spectacle. The Post's piece wasn't just reporting. It was shaping the narrative, amplifying the chaos. Public messaging? It was all over the map. Meanwhile, the legislature was tangled up in its own tensions. Lawmakers clashing with law enforcement, each side pushing their version of the truth. Media outlets were in the mix too, feeding the fire or trying to douse it, depending on the day. Procedural engagement meant hearings, statements, the whole dog and pony show. But underneath, it was a power struggle. Who controls the story? Who gets to say what's real? You know how these things go. Clean on paper, messy in the dark. The grand jury's impaneling set a tone of serious inquiry, but the media's hurricane label made it feel like a circus. Legislative folks were barking at cops, cops barking back, and reporters stirring the pot. It was all about posture, looking tough, sounding measured, while the ground shifted onto everyone's feet. Coming up, we will zero in on the personal histories and motivations of pivotal figures like Larry King and Alicia Owen to understand their central roles. So, we've poked around those official responses, watched how the grand jury and the press twisted this mess from cold cash to something darker. Now, let's get personal. Every story like this has its players, folks who pull strings or get tangled in them. Today, we're owing in on two, Lawrence E. Larry King Jr. and Alicia J. Owen. These aren't just names in a file.
They're the faces that shaped how this whole Franklin saga unfolded. Start with Larry King. Back in the 1980s, Omaha knew him as a rising star, the kind of guy who glad hands his way into the spotlight. He was the manager and treasurer of the Franklin Community Federal Credit Union, a place meant to help folks in the community, you know, the little guy. But Larry wasn't just crunching numbers. He was a political donor, rubbing shoulders with the powerful, making himself a public figure in that Midwestern scene. Charismatic, ambitious, Larry King built an image of success, the self-made man who could charm a room. Motivations? Power, probably. He thrived on connections, on being the guy who knows everyone. In Omaha's social circles, he was influential, pushing agendas, donating to causes that kept him visible. But it all came crashing down with that embezzlement conviction. Roughly $38 to $39 million gone. Poof. In the narrative of this case, Larry's the catalyst, the one whose financial schemes open the door to bigger questions. His role as a political actor added layers, made people wonder what else he was hiding behind that polished facade. You know how these things go. Clean on paper, messy in the dark. Then there's Alicia Owen. She's one of the principal accusers in this tangled web, the kind of voice that steps forward when others stay silent. Alicia gave those videotaped statements, laying out her side with raw detail. In the social context of 1980s Omaha, she was an outsider challenging the status quo, a young woman pushing against powerful interests. Her motivations seemed rooted in seeking justice, or maybe just truth. Hard to say from the outside. But her credibility turned into a battlefield. She got indicted and convicted on 8 counts of perjury, which shifted how people saw her story. Alicia fought back as an appellant in State v. Owen, challenging jury misconduct and pushing for a new trial, denials that only fueled the fire. In the broader narrative, she's the accuser whose words ignited debates, her influence rippling through legal circles and public opinion. Resilient, determined, Alicia became a symbol of the fight, whether you believe her or not. These two, Larry and Alicia, they're the human core here. One building an empire that crumbled under embezzlement, the other accusing from the shadows, only to face perjury convictions. Their personalities clashed in this story, his flash against her grit, shaping how the case echoed in Omaha and beyond. Next, we will analyze contradictions and evidentiary anomalies that challenge official narratives and deepen the mystery. We've gotten to know the main faces in this Franklin mess, their histories, and why they're so invested. But now, let's turn to the evidence itself, or what's left of it, because that's where the real knots start to show. You see, the official story tries to tie everything up neat, but pull at a few threads, and it unravels fast. Take the Douglas County Grand Jury's report from July 1990. They looked at those legislative videotapes, the ones with accusers spilling their stories of abuse and cover-ups. And what did they call it? A carefully crafted hoax. Yeah, they went ahead and indicted some of those accusers for perjury, saying the whole thing was made up, orchestrated to deceive. But here's where it gets sticky. That report drops right around the time things heat up. Just days before, on July 11th, 1990, Gary Caradori, the legislative investigator digging deep into these claims, dies in a small plane crash. Him and his son gone in an in-flight breakup. The NTSB chalks it up to loss of control, overstressed in bad weather conditions, no sign of any explosion on board. Clean conclusion, right? But the timing. Caradori was piecing together those videotapes, chasing leads on elite names that kept popping up in whispers. Lists of powerful folks circulated in the shadows, tied to the allegations. And then, poof, he's dead. And suddenly, the grand jury slams the door with their hoax label. You know how these things go. Tidy reports in the light, but questions lingering in the smoke-filled corners. Now, add in the missing pieces. Allegations swirl about missing briefcases, the ones Caradori supposedly had with him, packed with evidence, interview notes, maybe even more tapes. Exhibit materials that just vanish. People close to the investigation say they were there, then gone. Chain of custody gets murky too. Those videotape statements, who handled them? How did they move from Caradori's hands to the committee, then to the grand jury? Secondary sources point to gaps, breaks in the record that make you wonder if someone tampered, or if it was just sloppy work. Either way, it complicates everything. If the tapes are a hoax, why the rush to discredit right after Caradori's death? And if there's truth in them, those missing briefcases could be the key that got buried. These anomalies overlap, creating a web that the official story can't quite escape. Suspicion builds around the circumstances, the death, the timing, the vanished evidence. It all feeds into doubts about whether the grand jury's dismissal was too pat, too convenient. Next, we'll lay out those official narratives and court rulings that try to put it all to bed. We've poked at those nagging inconsistencies, the ones that make you question the tidy wrap-up. Now, let's turn to the machinery of justice itself. The courts, the juries, the official stamps that declared this whole mess closed for good. It all circles back to the Douglas County Grand Jury. In their July 23, 1990 report, they laid it out plain. The videotapes, those supposed smoking guns of abuse, were nothing but a hoax. Fabricated stories, they said, pieced together from rumors and coached testimonies. The jury sifted through hours of interviews, documents, and expert opinions before concluding there was no credible evidence of the grand conspiracy alleged. And they didn't stop at words. Indictments followed for perjury, targeting those whose accounts didn't hold up under scrutiny, including Alicia Owen, one of the key witnesses who claimed to have been part of the abuse ring. Her trial came in June 1991, running from the 19th to the 21st. The prosecution presented inconsistencies in her statements, timelines that didn't match, and evidence suggesting her story had evolved over time to fit a narrative. Witnesses testified about Owen's changing recollections, and the jury deliberated quickly. On June 21st, they returned a guilty verdict
on multiple counts of perjury.
Sentencing happened on August 8, 1991.
Owen got a substantial term, 9 to 15 years, if I recall right, based on the court's view that her false testimony had undermined the entire investigation.
She fought it, of course. Appeals went up in State v. Owen. And by 1993, the higher courts had reviewed claims of jury misconduct, allegations that jurors had discussed the case improperly or been influenced outside the courtroom. But those appellate opinions affirmed the denial of new trials. The evidence of misconduct wasn't strong enough, they ruled, and the original verdict stood on solid evidentiary ground. Shifting gears to the financial side, the fallout from Franklin Credit Union didn't just vanish. The National Credit Union Administration kept at it, pursuing recoveries long after the initial collapse. As late as January 5th, 2016, they secured a writ of execution on a $38.9 million judgment, part of ongoing efforts to claw back funds tied to the fraud that brought down the institution. Courts cited clear evidence of financial misconduct, from falsified records to insider dealings, justifying these hefty judgments without needing to invoke any larger scandals. Then there's the crash that took Gary Caradori, the investigator digging into all this. The National Transportation Safety Board's final report, CHI 90F A174, pinned it on pilot error, loss of control leading to overstressed airframe and in-flight breakup. They examined wreckage patterns, weather data, and maintenance records. No signs of tampering or external interference, just a tragic accident in the skies over Illinois. You know how these things go. Clean on paper, messy in the dark, but the official line held. No sabotage, no foul play, end of story. These were the pillars of vindication. The grand jury's hoax declaration, Owen's upheld conviction, the financial hammer dropping years later, and the NTSB's straightforward accident ruling. Courts and agencies leaned on facts presented, cross-examinations, and expert analyses to shut the door on doubts. It was meant to be the final word, restoring order to chaos. Yet, as we've seen, not everyone bought it. Questions lingered in the shadows, refusing to fade. In the following segment, we will explore the alternative and darker theories, contesting the official closure and alleging institutional conspiracy and cover-up. We've laid out the official story, the one backed by courts and agencies, calling it all a hoax, wrapped in perjury. But now, let's step into the murkier waters, where theories of a massive cover-up refuse to fade away. This alternate take isn't just whispers in the dark. It's a full-throated accusation that institutional suppression buried the truth. Proponents say powerful local elites weren't just bystanders. They were knee-deep in hidden trafficking networks, pulling strings to keep it all quiet. These claims paint a picture of abuse rings protected by the very institutions meant to expose them. Investigations got misdirected, evidence shuffled aside, all to shield the big names involved. And at the heart of this narrative stands John W. DeCamp, a former state senator turned attorney. DeCamp represented Alicia Owen, one of the key accusers, and he didn't stop there. He wrote The Franklin Cover-Up, a book that lays out his version of events, alleging a web of corruption reaching high places.
Then there's the so-called DeCamp memo, a document he circulated, pushing the idea that the whole affair was stifled from above. DeCamp's become the loudspeaker for this theory, keeping the suspicions alive years after the fact. Fueling it all is the timing of Gary Caradori's death, that plane crash hitting just as he claimed to have breakthroughs in his probe. Caradori was the investigator digging into the allegations, and boom, his small plane goes down in Illinois cornfields. He just told associates he had the goods, evidence that could blow it open. Then, tragedy strikes. Coincidence? To believers in the cover-up, it's anything but. They point to missing briefcases from the wreckage, key materials that supposedly vanished. Secondary sources talk about contested custody of those items, arguments over who got what and why. Official records from the NTSB and appeals courts don't resolve it to everyone's satisfaction. They leave gaps that skeptics fill with conspiracy. Allegations swirl about tampered evidence, files that got scrubbed or redirected. You know how these things go. Clean on paper, messy in the dark. These unresolved suspicions keep the controversy burning, even as official narratives try to douse it. DeCamp and others argue the system's rigged to protect its own, leaving victims' stories dismissed as fantasy. It's this clash between hard records and lingering doubts that makes the Franklin saga so sticky, so hard to shake. Factual limits hold the line, but the accusations poke holes, keeping the debate alive in podcasts, books, and late-night talks. Coming up, we'll shift to the human cost, the heavy toll this all took on everyone caught in the web, and the ripples that spread far beyond the verdicts. Shifting gears from those wild conspiracy theories we just unpacked, it's time to look at the real mess this case left behind. The legal fallout, the way it strained the courts, and the personal toll on everyone caught in the crossfire. This saga didn't just end with a verdict. It broke things, reshaped how justice gets done in Nebraska, and left scars that lingered. Let's start with the jury deliberations in Owen's perjury trial, back on June 19th through 21, 1991. That's when allegations of misconduct started bubbling up, jurors sneaking peeks at a dictionary to clarify terms, off-the-record chats with the judge that shouldn't have happened. It was the kind of procedural slip that makes you wonder if the system's as airtight as they claim. Then there were whispers about jurors tuning into that CBS 48 Hours episode mid-trial, soaking in outside takes on the case. Defense pushed hard for a new trial, saying it poisoned the well. The courts held evidentiary hearings, digging into every claim, but in the end, they held firm, no retrial. Owen got sentenced on August 8, 1991, and that was that, or so it seemed. But the appeals kept coming, dragging the whole thing through the mud. By November 9, 1993, the Nebraska Court of Appeals weighed in, affirming the denial of a new trial despite the 48 Hours mess. They said it didn't rise to actual prejudice. Tough break for Owen. This scrutiny didn't just fizzle out. It echoed into later cases. Take State v. Anderson in 1997. That one adjusted the standards for proving prejudice in jury misconduct situations,
drawing straight from the Owen fallout. It clarified procedures, made things a bit tighter, but at what cost? You know how these things go. They patch one hole, but the trust leaks out another. On a personal level, Owen paid dearly. Years tangled in appeals, his life on hold, reputation shredded. The judges, lawyers, even the jurors felt the heat, second-guessed at every turn. Investigative bodies took hits too, their methods questioned, resources drained by endless reviews. Media coverage amplified it all, turning procedural glitches into headlines that eroded public faith. The courts gained some operational tweaks, sure, but the legacy? A lingering distrust, whispers that the system buckles under pressure. They called it broke the courts for a reason. This case strained the machinery, left it creaking. And yet, amid the wreckage, questions still hang in the air. Unresolved threads begging for one more tug. We'll chase those loose ends next, the ones keeping this narrative wide open decades later. After digging through the wreckage of those trials and the trust they shattered, you'd hope for some closure. But here's where it gets tricky. These lingering mysteries that refuse to fade into the background. They keep whispering, pulling at the edges of what we think we know, fueling stories that won't die. Take the chain of custody for those videotapes and exhibits. It's a mess that still raises eyebrows. Documents claim they were handled properly, but gaps in the records leave room for doubt. Who had them when? How did they move from one hand to another without clear logs? These aren't just clerical errors. They invite questions about tampering, or worse. And then there are the witness statements, conflicting from the start, with motives that twist like smoke. Some recantations came later, flipping the script and muddying what seemed solid. Why the changes? Pressure? Fear? Or something deeper driving those shifts? Survivor narratives add to the haze, diverging in ways that defy easy labels. One remembers details, another swears never happened, leaving us to wonder what's real. Now, the crash, NTSB's probable cause finding, stuck to mechanical failure, explicitly ruling out sabotage. But speculation around Caradori's death lingers, probing ambiguities the report didn't touch. What about those circumstances that feel off, beyond the official scope? It's the kind of gap that keeps theories alive, even decades later. You know how these things go. Clean on paper, messy in the dark. All this unfolded in the late 1980s and early 1990s, smack in the middle of that moral panic era. Fear of hidden evils gripped the culture, shaping how people testified and institutions reacted. Testimonies got amplified or dismissed based on the hysteria of the time. These uncertainties don't just sit there, they fuel persistent cultural narratives. People still debate, re-examine, pulling at threads in books, forums, and quiet conversations. It's why the case echoes today, a shadow that questions everything we accept as resolved. In our final segment, we'll weave these strands together, pondering why the Franklin saga still burns as a symbol of unresolved cultural battles.
We've laid out those lingering shadows, the ones that keep the Franklin story alive in courtrooms and conversations long after the dust should have settled. But now, as we wrap this up, I keep coming back to the central question that ties it all together. Why did this messy cluster of embezzlement, wild allegations, perjury fights, and that heartbreaking loss of an investigator stick around as a stubborn, unresolved tale? Even with official rulings closing some doors while leaving others cracked open, it fractured trust in ways that still echo today. It's not just about what happened in Franklin. It's about how the story refused to die, splitting opinions into camps that won't budge. One side points to the official procedural explanation, saying it was all wrapped up neatly by the system. Courts decided on the embezzlement, dismissed a lot of the heavier claims as unreliable, and chalked up loose ends to human error or bad luck. In that view, the persistence comes from people not accepting the verdicts, turning resolved issues into endless debates. Then there's the cover-up angle, the institutional suppression theory that hits you in the gut. Believers say powerful folks buried the truth to protect their own, silencing voices and twisting evidence to keep the lid on. That explains why the narrative endures, because the real story, they argue, got shoved into the shadows by those who control the light. You know how these things go. Truth whispers, but power shouts it down. Don't forget institutional overreach, where the system itself went too far, pushing boundaries in pursuit of answers. Investigators leaned hard, maybe crossed lines, fueling backlash and claims of rigged games that eroded faith in the whole process. It's a reminder that when authority flexes too much, it creates its own monsters in the public's mind. And weaving through it all is the mixed reality idea. That memory contamination blurred the lines between fact and fiction. Stories got retold, details shifted under pressure, turning what might have been straightforward into a fog of half-truths and doubts. Hoax theories mix with perjury battles, procedural crises clash with suppression fears. It's a tangle that defies easy untangling. This saga didn't just fracture institutions. It splintered how we see truth itself, leaving us questioning every official word. Public trust took a hit because Franklin showed how narratives can outlive facts, feeding on ambiguity and outrage. Decades later, the debate rages on, not because of new evidence, but because the story taps into deeper fears about power and deception. It's a legacy of nuance, where no single explanation satisfies, and the questions linger like smoke in a dimly lit room. In the end, Franklin isn't about definitive answers. It's about the shadows we can't quite shake. And that's what pulls us back, time and again, to this fractured tale. This is the final summation and conclusion of the episode.